Hi, my name is Connie Strasheim. I'm a medical researcher and writer and the author of 5 books on holistic treatments for different diseases, including Lyme disease and cancer. I have written 2 books on Lyme disease, mostly because I suffered from Lyme disease myself for many years, and at the time that I was diagnosed, there wasn't a lot of good information published about Lyme disease on the internet or in books. So I spent several years investigating, researching Lyme, and interviewing doctors, and as a result, I have compiled 2 works, one of which has become a bestseller within the Lyme disease community, and it's entitled Insights into Lyme Disease Treatment. 13 Lyme literate healthcare practitioners share their healing strategies. Now, Lyme disease is an epidemic in the United States and around the world. There are over 200,000 new cases every year estimated, and there could actually be many more. Lyme disease is often misdiagnosed as a number of things, including chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, lupus, Parkinson's, MS, just to name a few. So anyway, I felt it was really important to write these 2 books. However, in recent years, I've noticed a different problem in the Lyme disease community or among people that have Lyme disease. And it's not just that they're getting misdiagnosed, but that the doctors who treat them tend to focus exclusively upon the infections. Now, if you say, well, if a person's sick principally because they have borreliosis and co-infections, or, all these infections that are commonly transmitted through the bite of a tick, or through the other means in which Lyme disease can be transmitted, then you think, well, that should be sufficient. And for some people it is, but more commonly what I've observed and what I've learned from doctors is that people with Lyme disease aren't just suffering from Lyme disease, they're suffering from a cocktail of a lot of different environmental factors, a lot of different things that are making them sick. And all of these things are not necessarily a result of Lyme disease. In fact, there are other principal causes of illness in people with Lyme besides Borrelia and co-infections. And some of these conditions preceded the Lyme. In other words, they're not just a result of the Lyme. And so what that means is that a lot of people with Lyme disease really only have the infections as one major component of their illness. For some people, that component could be 30% of the symptom picture, for others 50%, and for a few others maybe 80%. But more commonly, what I've observed among people that I know with Lyme disease, among the practitioners that I've talked to, is that most people with Lyme disease have, a number of different other issues going on, which may or may not be directly related to Lyme disease. That is, they may be a cause of Lyme, but they may have preceded Lyme. And the reason it's important to kind of understand the distinction a little bit is because I think when there are results of Lyme, then doctors focus more on treating the infections, assuming that these other conditions will go away on their own, or they may give less attention to treating those conditions. But if they were the precursor for Lyme, if they're what caused the body to become susceptible to Lyme disease, then in reality they need to be given as much attention in the treatment picture as the Lyme disease infections. So just to give you an example, if a person has adrenal fatigue, that happens in a lot of people with Lyme disease. Adrenal fatigue causes symptoms that mimic Lyme, and so sometimes people, doctors or people with Lyme will think, well, if I take some herbal remedies and support my adrenals while I get through the tick infection or treatment for the tick-borne infections, then I'll be fine. But if adrenal fatigue preceded the Lyme, it means that something else caused it. And in order to heal from it, you have to know what that cause is. For instance, emotional trauma causes adrenal fatigue. It's a major cause of adrenal fatigue. And treating emotional trauma is absolutely critical for the recovery of those people that have it as part of their symptom picture. So anyway, the book, I've written a new book, and I just published it last week, because I really wanted to address this issue. I wanted to address some of the causative factors of disease in people with Lyme beside borreliosis and tick-borne infections. And so I wrote this book. It's called Beyond Lyme Disease. And the purpose of this book is to uncover and tell people what they can do to heal from the conditions, the underlying causes of chronic illness. besides tick-borne infections, or borreliosis and co-infections, as the subtitle reads on this book. And so this book cites some of the top reasons, other factors that cause disease in people with Lyme besides the infections. And those factors include, as I mentioned, adrenal fatigue, and then all of the endocrine or hormonal dysfunction that goes along with that, nutrient deficiencies and toxic food. A lot of people think that, when you get sick from Lyme, you can't eat toxic food, or you can't eat conventional food in the supermarket anymore because you become sensitive to those things. But in reality, toxic food and nutrient deficiencies are very common in our society, and they're making a lot of people sick. Things like genetically modified organisms, pesticides, antibiotics. There are a lot of things being put into the food supply. It's being manipulated. Foods are nutrient depleted, and so all of this creates conditions in the gut for disease. And so if that's primary in the symptom picture, then it's really important to get on a good diet. Let's see, I have foci infections. Dental infections in the mouth are proving to be a major cause of illness in some people with major diseases like MS and chronic fatigue syndrome and Lyme disease. And I personally know of 2 people with chronic Lyme disease who said that getting the infections cleaned out of their mouths was at least as important for their recovery as treating the borreliosis and co-infections. So foci infections can be really huge. Electromagnetic pollution is another factor that's described in this book. We're constantly surrounded today by lots of electromagnetic fields, and there's evidence that when the body's exposed, bombarded to unhealthy levels of electromagnetic pollution, then the bacteria in the gut, the cellular behavior changes such that the bacteria in the gut can't defend against incoming pathogens. And one famous doctor actually went so far as to suggest that Lyme disease can be activated in an environment where there is a lot of electromagnetic pollution. So it's not just that Lyme disease causes electromagnetic sensitivity, but that electromagnetic fields themselves can predispose a person to disease by altering intercellular communications and behavior. Now, besides that, parasites is another topic in this book. Parasites are huge. 90% of people in the United States suffer from some type of parasitic infection. And for some people, this can be really, really important. I've spoken to doctors such as Lee Cowden, who's a Lyme literate physician, one of the best integrative medical doctors in the world, in my opinion, and he has seen people regain their energy quite radically after they treat the body for parasites. And so it's not just the Lyme disease infections that we need to be focusing on. It's, these parasitic infections, which can be more tenacious than Lyme disease organisms because they're bigger, they're more intelligent, and they have really a strong survival mechanism. So that's another issue in here. Mold is another one. I describe mold because a lot of people that I've known with Lyme disease also suffer from mold toxicity. And this is because many people with Lyme disease and other chronic illnesses can't effectively remove the biotoxins that are generated from a moldy environment. And some estimates, by some estimates, over 50% of the homes in the United States have mold in them. And so if that's true, and a quarter of the population can't remove mold from their bodies, what happens is that mold accumulates in the body. The mycotoxins that the mold produces accumulate and make the person really sick. And mold can be an even bigger deal for a person who's fighting Lyme disease than the tick-borne organisms. I mean, mold illness can make a person just as, if not sicker, than tick-borne infection. So it's really important to find out whether mold is causing problems. This book also contains information on environmental toxins, which are obviously a very huge cause of illness today in many people. And these can be toxins such as heavy metals. Heavy metals are really a major problem in people with chronic illness. But most people in our society have some degree of heavy metal toxicity, and recovery from Lyme disease or any chronic illness is really difficult unless you can get rid of the heavy metal toxins. GI dysfunction. GI dysfunction is caused by toxins. It's caused by problems with the food supply, a lot of things. But when the gastrointestinal tract starts having problems, when there's dysbiosis, a depletion of healthy bacteria from antibiotics, from pesticides, from a lot of things, when there's leaky gut syndrome as a result of toxins, then what happens is that whole particles of food can pass into the bloodstream and cause inflammation. Food doesn't get properly digested, and that in itself can create symptoms of severe chronic illness. And of course, GI dysfunction results when a person gets Lyme disease, but it can also be the precursor for Lyme. It can set the stage for the tick-borne organisms to come in and wreak havoc on the body. Emotional trauma is a subject that I'm particularly passionate about, and which I also wrote about in this book. Emotional trauma thrusts the body into a fight or flight response, and when that trauma is prolonged, it breaks down the immune system and sets the stage for disease. And overcoming it is sometimes requires more than just going to a counselor or meditating for 20 minutes, because it represents, trauma is sort of like you're not living your life in a way that's conducive to healing. And so I think a lot of times it's treated as kind of a side problem that needs to be dealt with in a person with chronic illness. Like, a doctor will say, just go to a counselor for 20 minutes a week, or, work on your thinking. And in reality, if it's a primary cause of illness, if it's what set the stage for disease, then other things really need to be done. And also because trauma can be stored in all the cells and organs of the body. And so it's really important to do therapies that will release that trauma out of the cells, because it's something we can't necessarily do through cognitive processes. And so I discuss that in this book as well. And then to a lesser extent, I talk about yeast infections, about candida, which is also a major problem in a lot of people with chronic illness, opportunistic infections, and there are a few other topics that are I talk about them in the last chapter of the book. And now beyond Lyme disease, also there's an appendix in which I present notes from different Lyme disease conferences, just for people who want kind of an update on what the latest treatment guidelines are for borreliosis and co-infections. So the appendix doesn't go into detail on those guidelines, but it provides kind of an overview on the latest in diagnosis and treatment of these infections. So I just thought that was a nice addition. So I invite you to check out Beyond Lyme Disease. You can read about it, read a free sample chapter, and you can also purchase the book at lymebook.com, lymebook.com. And I look forward to hearing your feedback. If you have any questions or concerns, you can email me at Connie9824 at AOL.com. Thank you, and God bless.